This Monday morning, and we're talking this morning about what Labour would do about the energy prices that we're facing going up this autumn and winter. Labour calling today for a freeze on the price cap, both in the autumn and the winter, funded, we understand, partly by backdating the windfall tax, isn't it, on oil and gas giants. And lots of you have been getting in touch with your points on this.
Yeah, we've asked you for your questions over the last several hours for Sir Keir Starmer, and we will be putting those questions to him in the coming moments. And a lot of people really concerned about what might happen with their bills this coming winter into autumn and also through into next spring. We'll be looking at the budget forecasts, what the projections are for fuel bills, and putting all of that to Sir Keir Starmer, who is announcing today what he would do, what his proposals would be if he was Prime Minister at the moment.
Because he's been under pressure, hasn't he, to come up with concrete policies, not just to attack what the government's doing, but to say what Labour would do. I suppose the challenge is we're still some way off from a general election, so right now he can't actually do anything, and we don't know who the next Prime Minister is going to be. So we're in this weird kind of stasis, aren't we?
Should we ask him about it?
Why don't you do that, Sal?
Because the party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, joins us now live from central London. Morning to you, Sir Keir Starmer.
Good morning.
I'm going to quote yourself at you. No one would pay a penny more on their fuel bill this winter. That is quite a big offer from Labour. How are you going to pay for that?
Well, it is a big offer from Labour, and we're going to pay for it by extending the windfall tax on oil and gas companies in the North Sea who've made much bigger profits than they expected, but also because our proposal, which is to prevent those energy prices increases going forward, will also dampen inflation, and therefore the money that would otherwise be paid on our debt because inflation is so high would not have to be paid. So that's how we'll pay for it. I mean, as you said just a moment ago, millions of families are really struggling to make ends meet, to pay their bills, and the price cap is going to go from just under about £2,000 per household to £3,500 in October, and then to £4,200 in January. And there will be millions of people watching this who say, I just can't afford that increase. So we've got a choice, really, a political choice, which is either we let the oil and gas companies continue to make huge profits whilst, every family across the country suffers, or we do something about it. And we, the Labour Party, have said we're prepared to do something about it. We're on the side of families who are really struggling, and we would have that windfall tax, and we would make sure these energy price increases do not go ahead in the autumn. And so instead of allowing the prices to go up and then trying to rebate people, we're going to cut the problem at source and stop those price increases.
I'll talk to you about inflation in just a moment, but first of all, I'm just curious to know, how long would the price cap last for? Would it go on if prices remain high? Would it go on into next year if bills remain higher next year? How long will that freeze be extended?
Yes, so this plan that we've put forward this morning is a fully costed plan for the 6 months taking us through the autumn and into the spring of next year.
What about beyond that?
Well, beyond that, we'll have to assess the situation. Of course, we will, according to the circumstances as they then are. But the question I think that every political leader needs to answer at the moment is, in relation to that massive hike, I mean, from a cap of £2,000 on bills to £3,500, then up again to £4,200 in January, which is going to make it a really difficult winter for millions of people. What are you going to do about it? And that's the question we're answering today. I accept that in the medium and long term, there have got to be other measures, which is why we've argued for some time that in addition to this package, we need to insulate millions of homes that are leaking heat and energy all of the time. We said that a year ago now, but the government's done nothing about it. But I think the question that everybody is really anxious about, because everybody I think now knows that in October their energy bills are going to go through the roof again, and then January even further, is what are you going to do about it? And the Labour Party says, we're on your side. We will tax the oil and gas companies that have made more money than they were expecting and use that money to freeze these prices to make sure there aren't those increases in the autumn.
How awkward is it that the Lib Dems, Ed Davey and the SNP got to this idea first?
Well, look, I tasked my team back at the beginning of July to come up with a comprehensive costed plan. And we asked ourselves, should we go down the route of allowing the increase to go ahead and then looking at schemes to possibly give people payments back after they've gone through the anxiety of the price rise? Or do we grasp the problem at source? So we've been working on this for 6 weeks now, and we're the only party that's put out there a fully costed, comprehensive plan. Today we've explained what we're going to spend the money on, how we're going to spend it, and where the money is coming from. So I'm very pleased that after 6 or 7 weeks of hard work, we've put such a serious proposal on the table. And for millions of people who are worried about their bills in the autumn, the question they want answered is, what are you going to do to help us? Do you have a comprehensive plan that's fully costed? And the answer to that from the Labour Party is yes, we do.
And if the energy companies can't provide energy that people can afford, should they be nationalised?
Well, the choice we've made in our plan is that every single penny that is needed for this plan will go directly to reducing the bills of families up and down the country. If you go down the nationalisation route, then money has to be spent on compensating shareholders. And I think in an emergency like this, a national emergency where people are struggling to pay their bills, I think that the right choice is for every single penny to go to reducing those bills, which is why we've gone for this across the board, freeze the prices, use that or raise the money for that through the oil and gas companies who've made more profit than they're expecting. And of course, the additional benefit of our plan is that it reduces inflation by up to 4%. And that is a huge concern of people as well, because everybody knows that with inflation, prices are just going up and up and up. And so every political party has to have an answer to the question, what are you going to do about the price rises this autumn? And also, what are you going to do about inflation, which is just going up and up and up? Our plan answers both of those questions.
Let's talk about inflation for a moment, shall we? Because I want to draw your attention to the front page of the Daily Telegraph today. Quotes from Paul Johnson, Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who says in the Telegraph, they're warning that £7.2 billion saving on interest payments on national debt is actually, this is what you're proposing, an illusion. Inflation will increase unless the huge subsidies remain permanent beyond the 6 months. It's an illusion in the sense that it will reduce interest debt payments in the short term, but unless you maintain these subsidies permanently, you won't reduce them in the long run. Inflation will be higher later on. That's from the director of the IFS.
Yeah, I've seen that. What Paul Johnson isn't disputing is that our plan will reduce inflation. So he's absolutely clear that that is the case. Of course, what he's rightly saying is what happens after April matters, because you have to maintain measures to reduce inflation. Of course, we have to do that in April when we see the circumstances. But what he's not suggesting is that we're wrong when we say that our plan will reduce inflation and therefore the huge payments we make on our debt because of rising inflation. So yes, it's true that in April and towards the latter end of next year, all of us will again be asked to say, well, what are you going to do now? And that's why what I'm saying about the medium and long term today is really important. But nobody, including Paul Johnson, is arguing with the fact that Labour's plan will not only keep energy prices down for millions of families this winter, but also keep inflation down, which is so important in terms of the drivers of price increases across the country.
You mentioned energy, of course. Energy, isn't the only thing that's rising. Food, drink price inflation rising to 8.7% in the year to May, according to the ONS. What would your government do to relieve that pressure? Would you introduce any other type of cap?
Well, the plan we've got obviously to keep energy prices frozen where they are and not allow them to increase will have a huge impact on families because their budget can then be used for other things. So there's a direct correlation between our plan and those other prices. But there are other things that we do need to do. Whilst we are cancelling quite a lot of what the government has put on the table, the one bit we're not cancelling is the £650 payments to those on universal credit and to pensioners. And we're additionally recognising that those who pay their energy bills through prepayment meters, there's about 4 million households who do that. Often those households are the ones struggling most. We've got a plan on the table for them because they pay an additional premium, which has an impact on what they can then spend on food and other commodities, etc. So the plan does cover that indirectly, because by reducing those energy prices, it allows people more money in their pocket this autumn than otherwise they would have. But I can't emphasise enough from the very many conversations I've had with people across the country, just how anxious people are about what's going to happen this winter. I spoke to pensioners in Dewsbury at the turn of the year who were saying to me that they're too scared to put their central heating on back in last winter. Often they were sitting there in blankets, some of them not getting up until very late in the day because they feared the cost of actually using their central heating. That's the human cost of this. And whether it's those pensioners or other families, I remember my own family at times. My dad was a tool maker in a factory, my mum was a nurse. We struggled at times to pay our bills. I know that for millions of families, they will be going through that anxiety this winter. And what we, the Labour Party, are saying is we're on your side. We've got a plan to ensure those price increases do not go ahead. And as I say, it's really a choice. Do we allow these oil and gas companies to carry on making these excessive profits whilst millions of families suffer, or do we do something about it?
Really briefly, because we are short on time and I do want to move on to other things. What would you do about food price inflation?
Well, the thing about inflation is we've got to get inflation down altogether, and that is why our plan is so important, because it takes down inflation. But there are other measures that need to be taken on food, etc., to keep those prices down. But coming back to, the pensioners I spoke to in Dewsbury, they explained to me, going around the supermarket, because their energy bill was so high, they were picking up food, looking at it, looking at the price and putting it back down again, because they couldn't afford both their energy bills and the food they would normally buy. So there's a direct link between what we're saying today and the overall budgeting of millions of people across the country. Let's
move on a little bit, shall we? Because I want to quote to you something that came out last week from former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. He said this, you will have seen this. In that time when there was perhaps not much coming out of Labour, he wrote an article and he said at the start of it, "Time and tide wait for no one. They don't take holidays." Now, you have been criticised for your response to this current crisis, for not being around, in fact, being away on holiday yourself just last week, while people like Gordon Brown, Ed Davey were outlining ideas about this current crisis. Should you have been here? Should you have spoken sooner?
Well, as I said a moment ago, I think it was the beginning of July, I said to my team, right, I want a fully costed comprehensive plan, and I want to see whether it's possible for us to freeze energy prices, but I need a fully costed plan, etc. We've been working on that for 6 or 7 weeks. So that's the first part of my answer. The second part of my answer is this. I've got a very important job as leader of the Labour Party, leader of the opposition, but I've also got another job that's really important, and that is I'm a dad. And I'm not going to apologise for going on holiday with my wife and kids. It's the first time we've had a real holiday for about 3 years. So I've been working on this for the best part of 2 months, including actually when I was on holiday. So this work started a long time ago. But as I say, I'm also a dad. And I'm not going to apologise for going on holiday with my wife and kids.
I think we are all allowed a holiday. I think we can all agree on that. Do you think Labour is providing effective opposition at the moment, considering that you are currently polling below Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, if you take the cost of living crisis, it was just about a year ago that I said that we should have a plan to insulate 19 million homes, which would massively reduce the energy bills that they have to pay. So that was September last year. In January, we proposed the windfall tax that it took the government 5 months to U-turn on. For 5 months they said we wouldn't do this, and then 5 months later they did it. We also proposed reducing VAT on energy bills. Rishi Sunak is finally saying actually Labour was right about that, and now we've come up with a comprehensive costed package. So for 12 months we've been talking about energy bills, so I don't think anybody can say that the Labour Party is doing anything other than leading on this and putting the ideas on the table, which, you know, as we've seen in the last 12 months, eventually the government catches up with and does a version of what we've been proposing. It's just that in the intervening months,
it's taken you till the middle of August to get a plan.
Well, we wanted to ensure that we had the forecast for the figures that are actually going to come in October. The credible forecasts were, the last of them was, I think, Tuesday of last week. So because what I wanted from the team was a fully costed plan, because otherwise you'd be challenging me, quite right too, to say, well, Kier, you've come out with a plan, but it's not costed. We've got a plan that takes into account all of those forecasts and puts that plan on the table today for an increase which is going to happen in October of this year.
We've been talking about strikes on the programme this morning. You may already know that. Do you support the right of front benchers to picket as long as they don't give interviews when they're doing it?
Well, my approach to this is relatively straightforward. The first thing I'd say is I absolutely understand why so many people are anxious about their wages, because for many years now wages haven't gone up, and in a cost of living crisis that makes it very, very difficult for families. So I understand the pressure. I support the right to strike and of trade unions to represent their members in what are often very difficult negotiations.
So you support the front bencher to go to a picket line?
I recognise that taking strike action is a matter of last resort for many of these trade union members. But my point about the picket lines is that the Labour Party is a party that doesn't want to be in opposition, it wants to be in government. And if you're in government, your job is to resolve the issues underlying strikes or other negotiations or disputes. Your job isn't to go onto the picket line, because in government you have to resolve the underlying issues. That's the point I make about that. Of course our members of Parliament and others will want to show their support for those that are struggling. I completely understand that, and that isn't a problem, but my focus, and the single most important thing that we can do for working people across the country, is to have a Labour government. I want to be in government, and if you're in government, you resolve issues and get people around the table. You do the exact opposite of what this government is doing, which is sitting, watching, and sitting on its hands, doing absolutely nothing about the crisis as it develops week by week.
So Keir Starmer, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. As the Labour leader, so Keir Starmer, live in London for us.